Now let's take a look at the first Berlin crisis, 1948. I want to be really clear on this one because Berlin's going to come up a few times in the course, and this is the first time it comes up in massive detail. So, this involves Stalin and Truman, okay, and it's the first Berlin crisis, 1948. Let's take a look at what happened. So what caused it? Well, Germany had been divided into 4 zones, but relations between East and West were souring. Berlin had also been split into 4 zones, as decided at the Potsdam Conference. Effectively, this all begins with an argument over the resources and the reparations agreed during the Yalta Conference, and the reparations needed to be paid by Germany at the end. Effectively, the Soviet Union wants to take the materials from Germany back to Russia as by way of paying the reparations. However, the West, USA, Britain and France want to rebuild Germany. What you've had here, well, rather, in December of 1947, the talks between the powers broke down. So what you've had is a group called the Allied Control Commission, and that is Russia, Britain, France and America meeting together to decide how to run Germany. Now, those talks break down in December of 1947 for the reasons I've just outlined, an argument over what to do with the resources and the reparations. Now, what happens then is the Allied Control Commission just continues to meet without Russian representatives. So effectively, Britain, France and America continue to decide what to do with Germany without a Russian representative at the negotiations. So from December 1947, they just carry on meeting without Germany. What this leads to is Trizonia, established in March 1948, the worst name for a state I've ever heard of in my life. This is a single state which exists within Berlin as well. Effectively, what's happened here is USA, Britain and France, as in 3, as in tri, decide to unite their zones. Trizonia, clever, innit? USA, Britain and France decide to unite their zones, so Germany and Berlin were now split in 2 rather than 4. Now, this makes perfect sense, as they are all the same political persuasion, they're all capitalists, and they all have similar belief systems. However, what this means is, effectively, rather than developing 3 zones separately, they have now combined forces. So you would expect to see the economy of the west of Berlin and the west of Germany improve quicker than the east, even more than before. They also introduce a new currency, the Deutschmark. So in June of 1948, the Allies created a single currency for Trizonia, creating complete economic separation from the East. Now, this in effect acknowledges formally that there was now 2 Germanys and creates complete division between the East and West. Now, what this also does is this makes Stalin feel ganged up on. He's a very paranoid man, and this only adds to it even further. So obviously, he's going to do something about it because it's Stalin. So what we get to here then is the Berlin blockade. Stalin decides to set up a blockade. Western occupied Berlin is in the east of Germany. So it's surrounded by the Soviet Union territory. Berlin is in sort of this area here, so it's surrounded by the Soviets. What that means is Western occupied Berlin was surrounded by the Soviet territory. There were 2 agreed land and air routes for the West to provide supplies into Berlin. So what Stalin does in June of 1948, not long after the establishment of the Deutschmark currency, in June 1948, Stalin shuts off the land routes, meaning the people of the west of Berlin would starve. If it was successful, this would be a huge Soviet propaganda victory because it shows that they needed communism in order to survive. So, what do the West do about it? Well, we don't have direct military conflict, do we? Because one will be the aggressors now, won't we, if we just attack? And obviously we've got an arms race going on, and it might lead to mutually assured destruction. So we can't do that. So we need to find another way to provide these people with supplies. Now, what that leads to is they decide to operate, or rather the Allies, Britain, France and America, they introduced the Berlin Airlift, or Operation Victuals. The Western Allies are going to fly food, coal and other necessities along the air corridors, and this lasts for a full year. Now, effectively, this is a big risk. It's calling Stalin's bluff, because to stop them, Stalin would have to shoot them down. So they're effectively just flying in supplies. So Stalin could shoot them down. However, it would be an aggressive act and effectively, kind of a declaration of war, wouldn't it? If you just start shooting down civilian planes or, planes without soldiers on them. Stalin, therefore, doesn't. So it seems that Kennan's telegram was right, as in, Stalin is paranoid about the West. And he fears them. However, he's not suicidal, so they need to be dealt with firmly. So they've stood up to Stalin, they've flown the planes in, and crucially, he hasn't shot them down. Nobody wants to be the one who fires first. They are seeing how far they can push the other. The people of West Berlin build a new runway, and a new airport was built by ordinary citizens and Western troops. Now that's important because that shows their absolute determination to not fall into the hands of the communists, doesn't it? And their desire to remain capitalist. The Berlin Airlift proved a huge success, and around 1,000 tons of goods were flown in every day, and the people of West Berlin survived. Eventually, on the 9th of May 1949, the Soviets lifted the blockade and the West survived. So almost a full year after the blockade began, the blockade is ended. So there's your narrative account. Let's get into the consequences of the Berlin crisis beginning in 1948. Then, well, what you see is now the formal formation of West Germany. Germany is now clearly divided into two, isn't it? You've got West Germany, called the Federal Republic of Germany, set up on the 23rd of May 1949, just 2 weeks after the airlift, or rather after the blockade is ended. The zones were permitted to come together as a state, and on the 14th of August they get their own parliament, and West Berlin stays as West Berlin. So what does the east of Germany do? Well, it becomes East Germany, doesn't it? Called the German Democratic Republic. In October of 1949, this is clearly a direct reaction to the Western zones unifying as the Federal Republic of Germany. It's run as a satellite state. I should say run, not runner. Run as a satellite state by the Soviets, and the West refused to acknowledge it as a state. So Britain, France, America, and the West say, no, you're not real. We're not talking to you. This angers Stalin and causes more friction. We're seeing an atmosphere of increased mutual, as in going both ways, increased mutual distrust. What this also leads to is the establishment of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. If one of these countries is attacked, then all will defend them. And crucially, West Germany was allowed to join NATO in 1955 and was internationally recognized as a country. Now, what does West Germany's admittance into NATO mean? Well, the Soviets have to react, so they settled the Warsaw Pact in 1955, the Soviet equivalent of NATO, and a direct reaction to the fact that West Germany was allowed to join NATO.